I think we all know about U-Haul. If you're moving or for some reason need to move some big stuff, you can rent a truck or a van from them and it'll allow you to do it. It's a huge company worth billions of dollars on the stock market and approaching $4 billion in revenue each year. The company is actually called Americo. To a lesser extent, they deal with storage facilities and property and life insurance, but we all know them for their U-Haul trucks. I don't know how interesting that sounds either, but you're going to have to trust me on this one. Holy cow, we have scandals, lawsuits, expulsion, death, murder. It all centers around this guy named L.S. Schoen. His father was a farmer who lost his land during the Great Depression, so he was forced to find odd jobs to pay for college, one of which was butchering cows, another was cutting hair. He made it to medical school, and 1 year before graduation, he was expelled. The reason was for covering for a friend who didn't show up that day, which to me sounds like an excessive punishment, but maybe it was a 3-strike type situation. But either way, he was kicked out of medical school. From there, he entered the Navy. It was toward the end of World War II, but he had various illnesses and was discharged before ever seeing any action. That's where U-Haul enters the picture. He and his wife needed to drive home about 1,000 miles from his military base, and they had trouble finding a trailer they could use to bring all their stuff. Along that drive, the two of them had the idea of starting a trailer rental business, one where you could rent one in one place and return it in another. When they returned, they took their life savings, which was about $5,000, and used it to either buy or build trailers and hand paint them that signature orange color. And I have to give them credit for using that bright orange on everything. What a quick and easy way just to stand out. I know that initial $5,000 may not sound like much, but keep in mind that their first trailers were rented for $2 a day. They would make them available by working with various gas stations and repair shops across the country, providing them with trailers to rent to people and giving them a commission for doing it. Not surprisingly, it was a big success. Firsthand, they saw this demand that was going unfilled and took advantage of the opportunity. I admire them for it. We all have those moments where we come up with an idea to improve something or make a task easier. You know, they should really make a mop where the handle pulls at. I don't know, I don't have any right now, but we never follow through. I couldn't think of any of my own right there because they're out of my mind 10 minutes later, but these two did something about it, and that should be respected. In the following years, the economy was great, more roads were being constructed, everyone was moving out to the suburbs, and that's good news for a company like U-Haul. Now, during all of this, LS and his wife Anna Mary had 6 kids, all of which were completely involved in the business from a ridiculously early age. The plan was to teach them everything about it so they'd become experts and be fully prepared to run it when it's eventually passed down to them. Well, in 1957, at age 34, their mother, Anna Mary, died of a heart issue. U-Haul was an even partnership between her and her husband, meaning she owned 50% of it, and she left that 50% to be split between her 6 kids. 1 year after his first wife's death, LS married his second wife named Suzanne, and together they had another 5 kids. That's all getting hard to keep track of, and trust me, it just gets worse. But for now, back to the business. It was having trouble in the early 70s. For one, the competition was closing in. As I said, demand for this sort of thing had just grown, and U-Haul was the main business to benefit from it, but you can only expect to go effectively unrivaled for so long. Ryder, who eventually became their biggest competitor, had just entered the industry in 1968 and was on their way up, but a much more immediate issue was the oil crisis. In the early 1970s, the oil supply was very low, which made gasoline expensive and actually hard to find. It impacted almost every business in one way or another, but U-Haul even more so. For obvious reasons, it made it difficult or even next to impossible for people to travel and move, so demand for their services was down. But remember, their trailers were being rented at gas stations, of which people weren't visiting now because they didn't have any gas, which made the station struggle. They were forced to lay off people. They couldn't afford to continue employing people to rent out the trailers. I think it may have been time to panic over at U-Haul. It forced them to make a bold yet necessary move. Since they can no longer rely on these gas stations to rent their trailers for them, they were forced to take on the responsibility themselves, which meant opening hundreds of company-owned U-Haul locations. You can imagine the costs involved in that. Costs that you don't want to have to spend when the company is in in this condition. By this time, 4 of the initial 6 children had graduated from college and were working in important management positions at the company. Now, the company had just entered the storage business and it was going well, so LS was looking to rent other things. They started renting motorhomes, jet skis, videos, even party supplies.
I didn't know U-Haul rented lawnmowers, tillers, cement mixers.
Now U-Haul centers rent almost everything.
To me, it seems like a strange direction. All of these things are so unrelated. I guess I just see them more as a truck company than a rental company, if that makes sense. But obviously, LS saw it the other way. The company profits weren't great over this time. I'm not surprised by that. Obviously, you're going to be more profitable from your core scale business than you are from any new endeavors. Those will take time and hopefully be worth it in the long term. I'm guessing that's what LS was thinking, but many disagreed with the new direction. I guess you can say the issues sparked this family feud, a really intense one. From my perception, there were 2 main people on each side, LS and Sam on one side, and Joe and Mark on the other. I know that can be hard to remember, but it's important that you do, so I'm going to keep it on the screen. Over here. LS and his oldest son Sam thought that this was the way to go. Diversify, start renting out everything, and eventually U-Haul will be a bigger and better business than ever before. 2 of his other sons, Joe and Mark, disagreed. They felt the new direction was harming the company and causing them to lose focus on the core of their business, which of course was rental trucks. They were taking out too much debt to fund all this other stuff, and the lower profits were complicating the issue. Meanwhile, their trucks were getting old, and that end of things was starting to slip and needed attention, is what Joe and Mark argued. Listen to this. The 2 quit the company in 1979, only to return 7 years later when they won the support of the board of directors and essentially forced LS into retirement. He agreed to leave under the condition that the position of CEO would be given to Sam. That structure lasted less than a year when Sam quit because he couldn't work with his brothers. When Sam stepped down, his brother Joe took over and is actually still CEO today. Immediately following, Sam teamed up with his father again in a complex attempt to take control away from Joe and Mark, who were able to stop the attempt, but then Sam and LS took the company to court to challenge the way they stopped the attempt, which led to more feuding and court battles, the last of which wasn't resolved until 2012, if you can believe that. This was a mess. In Joe and Mark's defense, U-Haul started doing much better when they took over. As you can imagine, a much larger emphasis was placed on truck rentals. They kept the storage facilities because those were doing pretty well, they still have them today, but they discontinued almost everything else that wasn't profitable, which, let's face it, was just about everything else. In addition, they sold many of their old trucks and added 50,000 new ones over the next 5 years, along with increased promotion of their moving-related products, such as boxes and packing material. I'd say the craziest part of this feud happened in 1990. It's sad to talk about, but Sam's wife, Ava, was murdered. It was at her home, a gunshot wound to the back. There's plenty of coverage on this, and I don't particularly want to talk about it, so I'll keep it short. LS and Sam believe that Joe had probably hired a hitman to kill Sam, and things went wrong. Joe then returned by filing a lawsuit for libel against LS for publicly stating that Joe was involved. What a mess. A few years later, someone was convicted of the murder. Joe and Mark were deemed to be uninvolved, but it doesn't appear that LS was ever convinced of it. That's enough of that. In 1994, in a court proceeding related to that whole forced retirement a few years ago, Joe Schoen and 5 other directors of the company were ordered to pay $1.47 billion, and Joe had to pay a separate $70 million in punitive damages. Those amounts were soon ruled to be reduced to $462 million and $7 million. It caused the directors to file for bankruptcy, which made the company responsible for the amount, so they were forced to sell a ton of assets to cover it, many of which were bought by Mark, which, my goodness, led to an accounting scandal. It had to do with the way they were accounting for these self-storage properties that were sold to a special purpose entity mostly owned by Mark. It's tricky, but in 2002, the accounting firm PwC, who had recommended this accounting 8 years earlier, said it was actually illegal and they now had to change their previous statements. When they switched the method and changed the statements, they now showed lower income and more debt, which made it harder to secure loans and forced them into bankruptcy. And then they later sued the accounting firm for $2.5 billion for the bad advice that they were provided. Oh my goodness. To finish the story of LS Schoen, it's not a happy ending. Shortly before this accounting scandal came to light, in October of 1999, he died at age 83. He drove his car into a pole, and the coroner's office said it was a suicide. Not much more to say about it, but I felt it should be said. By the end, he had been married 5 times, had 12 children with 3 different mothers, and along with his family, built one of the largest and most successful businesses of its kind. Let me know in the comments. This is a crazy story, right? When you rent that U-Haul truck to move some furniture, did you know there was such a history here? All of these legal battles and feuds within the family and everything else have, at various points, led to instability within the company. That's the amazing part. Despite everything, they're bigger than ever. Everything I talked about that you would expect to negatively impact them, or at least the family or leaders within it, has not brought them down. So anything you have to say about this company or their crazy history, leave it in the comments. I'd like to hear what you have to say. Alright, I have to do this. I wanted to mention one more thing before I go, because I found this incredible. Joe Schoen, I've been talking about him this whole time. He was on the side with Mark, who forced his father into retirement and has been CEO of U-Haul for the past 30 plus years. And this is real. He makes his personal cell phone number available to the public. In 2008, he revealed it on a national television show and claims to answer just about every call. He says he wants to communicate with his customers directly, since that way he can have a better understanding of what the customers want, and everything along those lines. I don't want to put his actual number up here because I'm afraid he'll be bothered by a bunch of nonsense calls, and I don't encourage that, but you can find it. I tried calling him to confirm, and a guy that sounded like Joe Schoen picked up, and I think it was him. Kind of freaked me out. Just something I wanted to share. Alright, thank you for watching.